The 17th century story of the indigenous Guarani slaves in Paraguay is one of resilience and resistance against colonization, exploitation, and the struggle for identity and rights. The Guarani, a significant indigenous group in Paraguay and surrounding regions, faced drastic changes with the arrival of European settlers, particularly the Spanish and Jesuit missionaries, who transformed the cultural and social fabric of their lives. Through forced labor, religious conversion, and constant battles for legal recognition and land rights, the Guarani's complex interactions with the Spanish and the Catholic Church reveal the duality of suffering and survival. The Spanish colonization of South America in the 16th and 17th centuries brought profound disruption to indigenous communities, including the Guarani. Initially, the Spanish were interested in the fertile lands of Paraguay, which provided opportunities for agriculture, as well as potential access to silver mines in other regions. For the Guarani, this meant the arrival of Spanish settlers seeking to assert control over the land and establish a colonial order based on labor exploitation and economic gain. The encomienda system, an exploitative colonial labor arrangement, was one of the primary mechanisms through which the Spanish seized control of indigenous labor. This system allowed Spanish landowners, or encomenderos, to entrust groups of indigenous people to work the land in exchange for supposed protection and Christianization. However, in practice, it functioned more as a form of enslavement. Many Guarani found themselves working under brutal conditions on farms and plantations, often with no possibility of freedom. In response to the harsh treatment and exploitation of indigenous peoples, the Catholic Church played a complex and sometimes contradictory role. The Jesuits, a Catholic missionary order, established missions, or reducciones, in the early 17th century in an attempt to convert the Guarani to Christianity and protect them from Spanish and Portuguese slave raiders. These missions became safe havens for many Guarani, offering them a refuge from outright slavery and an environment where they could live and work under somewhat better conditions. However, life on the missions was not without its own difficulties. The Jesuits imposed strict rules on the Guarani, who were required to abandon their traditional customs, language, and religious practices in favor of Catholic rituals and a European-style lifestyle. The missions were designed to teach the Guarani European agricultural techniques, trade skills, and literacy, which the Jesuits believed would civilize them. In some respects, the mission succeeded in creating cohesive, self-sustaining communities, yet they also led to the erosion of indigenous cultural identity. For the Guarani, a major issue was the lack of legal recognition of their rights to the land they had inhabited for generations. The Spanish colonial authorities often viewed the Guarani as subjects without full rights, which placed them in a legally precarious position. While the Jesuits advocated for Guarani rights within the mission system, the Guarani living outside these missions had little recourse. They faced the constant threat of displacement as Spanish settlers and landowners sought to expand their holdings. The Jesuits occasionally petitioned the Spanish crown to provide the Guarani with some form of legal protection, but these efforts were often met with limited success. Even when legal decrees were issued to protect indigenous lands, they were rarely enforced in practice. The Spanish elite, motivated by economic gain, frequently ignored these decrees, confiscating Guarani lands and forcibly displacing entire communities. This situation led to widespread poverty among the Guarani, who were left without resources and unable to secure stable livelihoods. The Guarani were not passive victims in this process. They actively resisted Spanish oppression and exploitation. On numerous occasions, they revolted against colonial forces, fighting to reclaim their lands and preserve their autonomy. These revolts were often sparked by increased labor demands, attempts by Spanish settlers to encroach on Guarani territory, or mistreatment at the hands of encomenderos. The Guarani also employed nonviolent forms of resistance. Some fled deep into the forests to escape forced labor, while others took refuge in Jesuit missions, where they were better protected. The missions themselves became centers of resistance in many cases. The Jesuits, aware of the economic contributions the Guarani made to colonial society, argued that their protection and Christianization of the Guarani was in line with the Crown's objectives. However, this advocacy was often limited to those within the mission system, leaving a large portion of the Guarani population vulnerable. By the late 18th century, the situation for the Guarani deteriorated further. In 1767, the Spanish crown expelled the Jesuits from the Americas, dismantling the mission system that had served as a temporary buffer against enslavement and land seizure. The missions were left without their primary protectors, making the Guarani even more vulnerable to exploitation. Spanish and Portuguese settlers quickly seized mission lands, and the Guarani who had lived on them were once again exposed to forced labor and displacement. Without the Jesuits' advocacy, the Guarani's legal standing eroded further. Many were reduced to serf-like conditions, working on lands they had once considered their own. In a final blow to the Guarani's remaining rights, the Spanish crown declared that any land not directly granted to indigenous communities could be claimed by Spanish settlers. This policy essentially nullified any remaining legal recognition of Guarani land rights, leading to widespread dispossession. Despite centuries of colonization, exploitation, and forced assimilation, the Guarani have maintained a strong cultural identity. They preserved elements of their language, religion, and traditional customs, which remain central to Guarani communities today. The Guarani language is still widely spoken in Paraguay and has been recognized as an official language alongside Spanish, a testament to their resilience. In contemporary Paraguay, descendants of the Guarani continue to face struggles over land rights, social recognition, and economic opportunity. Indigenous groups today work to reclaim traditional lands and secure legal rights, long denied to them by colonial and post-colonial governments. Their history serves as a reminder of the enduring impact of colonization on indigenous communities and the importance of ongoing efforts to address these historical injustices.